This is Lisa from MobileTechReview, and it's that time of year, new iPhones. So this review is about the 13 Pro and Pro Max. So you get two sizes as always, 6.1 inch and 6.7 inch for your iOS 15 smartphones from Apple. And this is what everybody's been calling an S year, from the days when Apple had iPhone model and then the following year an iPhone S model, which meant incremental jumps instead of big jumps. So some people aren't that excited, and I was feeling kind of the same way. And then as I was writing my notes for doing this video, and it got longer and longer, and there were so many actual improvements there, I thought, you know, it's not exactly S. Maybe it's S Plus. Maybe it's full-blown 13, which in fact they're calling it. We are going to find out now. So the prices have stayed the same. $999 starting price for the 13 Pro, $1099 for the Pro Max, the bigger phone, right? At this time, the cameras are on parity. Last year, they weren't. The Max got a somewhat better main camera sensor, that sort of thing. Well, now you don't have to agonize over getting the bigger phone even if you don't want just to get a better camera system. They're the same. And as ever with Apple, storage increments, you want to go from the base 128 gig, yay, it starts at 128 gig now, up to 256 or 512 or up to 1 terabyte. Each increment is $100 more. These are 5G phones with mmWave support as well, which is the ultra fast but ultra not much deployed kind of 5G that's available. And as ever, it's available on all major carriers, minor carriers, and unlocked if you wish to. And then you can use it on whatever carrier you want. Yay. So there are a lot of deals out there, and Apple's own trade-in programs are getting almost as generous as Samsung's, where it's almost like you feel like you should do it because it's such a good deal. So if you had last year's model, and granted, a lot of people might not want to bother upgrading this year, but if you did, you get $640 if you trade in, if you already own it, your 12 Pro. And you get $790 for your 12 Pro Max towards a new phone. So if you're talking $300 to $350 to upgrade, you might say, maybe why not? Of course, carriers have crazy deals like $1,000 off, but that gets complicated because they pay you back in monthly payments and you're kind of tied to them. Depends how you feel about your carrier. So granted, with iPhones, people say sometimes they move on to Android for a while, whatever, because they're boring. Things change slowly. The good part about that is things are typically very consistent. UI is well done on these phones. Third-party support is pretty solid. All that sort of stuff. It's stability, and some people prefer that in their phones. Some people want cutting edge and customizability and the ability to do this. Yes, this is a Galaxy Z Flip, right? And some people just want it to work and to be pretty similar to what was last year, so there's no big learning curve. So obviously that's the argument for iPhone, or one of the arguments for iPhone. And you do get that here, but this year, let me just say, I get it, bugs on the new version of an operating system. Things are even worse now because COVID, work at home, teams aren't getting bug fixes done as well as they should, but I found iOS 15 a bit buggy. Now, out of the box, there's an upgrade to download, or an update, to fix some of the out-of-the-box issues, but things like, I like the Apple Watch. It's one of the things that sells me on an iPhone to this day. And unlocking my phone using my watch isn't working right now, and it seems to not be working for most people out there still, and Apple still hasn't fixed it. It's like, what, a week now since the phones came out? And there are a couple of other weird things, some of which are fixed by reboots, user interface bugs, like suddenly your URL bar turns white with white text. That's evil, isn't it? I'm seeing more of those than usual. So despite that, I will say typically iOS is very stable. The user interface is well done. The third-party support is really strong in terms of consistency of user interface and familiarity and all that sort of stuff. But I will admit, this year is a little rougher than usual. Now, for some of those upgrades, and as I wrote them all down and the script got longer and longer, well, what are they? First thing is that 120 Hertz ProMotion display. We've had that in Android land for a while. Fast refresh displays, be it 90 Hertz or 120 Hertz. Apple typically waits till the technology is really there and the drawbacks are less. And maybe that's what makes them seem slower to evolve versus Android phones. So now that we have 120 Hertz variable refresh OLED displays, so you're not wasting CPU cycles when you're playing 30 frames per second content anyway, they've managed to give us 120 Hertz without killing the battery life. In fact, battery life gets better. How'd they do this? Combination of things, no doubt, including really good CPU optimizations and all sorts of other stuff. But That's nice. Now, I didn't feel as much of a need to have an iPhone with a faster refresh display because of the way the operating system handles drawing to the screen. Typically, things look more painted on and less jello-y, you know, when things are all blurry, icky, that sort of thing. But once I saw it on the iPhone, it was pretty darn delightful. And then I used a third-party app where it isn't yet supported, and you could really see the difference. I'm like, why does this look so mushy on the screen? And conspiracy theorists, go take a nap right now, because no, it isn't just Apple's own first-party apps that get to have 120 hertz. There's new APIs for apps. If developers want to enable faster refresh, they just include their APIs in their app, update it, and Bob's your uncle, you got a zippier looking display. Now, obviously, it's going to make sense to have that in some apps more than others, but it's available. The notch got 20% smaller, which 20% is not very big, right? Whatever. It's smaller in this way. It's not as wide across. It still drops just as far down. It's still there. It's still big. I know you're thinking, why can't they have hole punch cameras like the other cool kids in town, right? Because they have Face ID, which is 3D facial recognition, throwing little beams of light, invisible beams of light at your face and stuff like that to make it really secure, unlike the typical 2D facial recognition we see on competing smartphones. And getting all of that hardware that small and hiding it isn't as simple as just a selfie camera hole. So there's that. So we live with a notch, which I don't find to be particularly attractive. I don't love it, but I do like Face ID, as long as I'm not wearing a mask, which is when my Apple Watch is supposed to unlock it. Yeah. So that's pretty nice. We have the Apple A15 CPU, which this time in terms of CPU computational prowess isn't a huge improvement. It's about 10%, 15%, which is fine. I mean, things should move forward. But the GPU does give 40 to 50% faster than last gen, which is nice. And it goes from 4 cores to 5 cores. So given the fact that most of us, even playing games, can't find anything that's going to tax a smartphone that much anymore, and these things are wicked fast, and you got a 3.2 gigahertz clock speed and all that. It's used for the nifty things like the computational photography, which both Google with the wonderful Pixel cameras and Apple with their cameras use to great advantage. Obviously, the hardware on these, even if it gets better for the cameras, is still tiny stuff. You can't get SLR, mirrorless camera level quality here with this hardware. It's the computational stuff that makes it look as good as it does. It also makes portrait mode work pretty well, which these days certainly it is a mature technology. And they have brought the new cinematic mode videos, which I think people are going to have a blast with. I know some of you pickier people out there are like, well, they call it Pro mode, even if it is ProRes video codec, which yes, it does do. It's coming with an update, and Pro RAW for photos. Obviously, this is not going to be what you film the next Lord of the Rings movie with, is it? But for most folks, I think they're going to have a lot of fun with cinematic mode. It's 1080p at 30 frames per second just for the cinematic mode, but that's the one that racks focus, which means you get depth of field like you do in portrait mode, only in video. And as Apple demoed, it can also automatically pick the focal points. So if you're focusing on one person, there's another person in the room, the person you're focusing on turns and looks at them, in theory, it should follow focus. It doesn't work that reliably yet, but you can tap to focus anywhere. And that's the way a lot of mirrorless cameras work anyway these days. I'm pretty happy to have that if it works fairly quickly. And that is. Now, a neat thing also is after the fact, you can actually edit the file and change the focus point to suit yourself, which is kind of brilliant. So if you felt like the camera was doing too much bokeh or not picking focus quick enough, you can edit that. You can do that on the iPhone, you can do that in Final Cut, and Apple's going to make support available to Adobe and others for those of you who actually are getting that serious with it. I think most people are just going to think it's a lot of fun. Things are going to look pretty. Suddenly, like your videos are going to look a little more pro and slick and all that sort of thing. So good use of a faster GPU in the phone, no doubt. You can still shoot 4K video at 60 frames per second. You still have your fancy HDR, your Dolby Vision, and all of those sort of things. The cameras themselves have improved quite a lot. The sensors are bigger now, the lenses are even wider aperture, and that means night mode is brilliant. Now, I review pretty much every major phone that comes to market, and I have to say, last year's iPhones, they were good. They didn't impress me. Things like landscapes, the leaves were too sharp and the grass was too sharp and it was busy and digital looking a little bit. There were some things to complain about. This year, not only have they addressed that, but the night mode is really good. The detail, the lack of color cast, the lack of light blooming, and you've got it supported supposedly on all 3 cameras. So I find the telephoto is still too slow a lens to really reliably do that, but the wide angle, ultra wide angle now, works just really well. And I have to say, again, I've reviewed them all. I'm picky. As a hobbyist, I'm a photographer too. I really like what you can do with these cameras. And whether you get the smaller or the larger Pro model, you're getting the same hardware again. So, yeah, it's enjoyable. Can't wait to see what the Pixel 6 brings to the table too. We like competition, don't we? And while we're talking about camera improvements, you know the macro camera that we see added to Android phones, like OnePlus phones, and I like OnePlus phones a lot. Here's the thing though, they mostly suck, you know, because they don't have any form of real autofocus there. So you have to get just the right distance away, and then you think you got it, then you move ever so slightly when you hit that shutter button, and then you've got another blurry bug, right? This is so well done. It's so automatic that you can actually take neat macro shots for dummies. It's nice stuff. And it does switch to the ultra-wide angle lens to do that, which looks a little jarring when you see that focal change. And Apple says it allows you to override that and switch to the main lens if you want, but whatever. Anyway, it's easy, it does a nice job, and things are actually in focus. Good. All right, so remember when I touched on battery and how despite having a fast refresh display here, the battery life didn't get worse. The phone's got a little thicker and a little heavier to add a little more battery in, which, geez, I think is actually a brave choice these days, where especially Apple started this whole thinnification thing where people started to say, I wish I just had more battery. Well, about 11 grams heavier, a little bit bigger battery. So Apple says 2.5-hour longer runtime on the Max phone, which already had psycho long run times, and an hour and a half longer on the regular Pro size, 6.1 inch. And so far from what I'm seeing, this is accurate, which is just wonderful. Now, I bounce between a Pro Max and a Pro model year to year sometimes, but just like some of you, I wish I could have the pocketability of a smaller phone, but I like that big screen and that battery life. So that really helps with the choice now. For those of you who do prefer the smaller model, it's not like you're going to have as much of a painful battery experience. Really very good. I mean, the big one, you should be able to manage 10 hours of screen on time unless you're doing something crazy like Pokemon Go. And for the smaller one, you should be able to get 7.5. That's pretty good for phones. It's pretty good improvement. For an S year, it's starting to look a little rosier. That said, these are pretty heavy phones. 204 grams for the Pro, 240 grams for the Pro Max. So while you're blaming that little bit bigger battery, which really added only 11 grams, blame it on the posh stainless steel frame that you get on the Pro models versus aluminum. It's a lot heavier, folks. Of course, glass is heavy as well. So what makes it more durable, more pretty, makes it hurt more if you accidentally drop it on your foot and the frame hits your foot, is the stainless steel. So in terms of thickness, I know some people are like, oh my God, they're just getting so thick. The square sides make it look thicker than it is. When I put it next to my Galaxy S21 Ultra, they're about the same thickness. So optical illusion versus reality there, not so much. Other standard amenities are Wi-Fi 6, Bluetooth 5, of course, NFC, Apple Pay, all that sort of stuff. MagSafe charging is back again, and that's 15-watt wireless charging. It's also compatible with 7.5-watt standard Qi charging or 20-watt wired charging or higher. You can use a more powerful charger if you want, like your MacBook Airs, something like that, if you're an Apple person through and through. And yes, just like last year, for environmental reasons, there is no charger in the box. And if you use that little old-fashioned square, 5-watt iPhone charger, it will take forever to charge. So you do want something that's like 20 watts or better. And yes, it still has a lightning port. We might have seen even the iPad mini finally move over to USB-C, and now Europe has mandated that electronics have USB-C, so probably next year Apple will either have USB-C or only use wireless charging. I don't know which, but yeah, we still got lightning here. You do get the USB-C to lightning cable in the box and the sticker. So who are these phones for? Well, obviously for iPhone people who really enjoy the iPhone experience and are ready for an upgrade. You got an iPhone 10, an iPhone 8, whatever it is. If you have the iPhone 12, you've just heard about what the upgrades are, and they're not without some compelling, I kind of want those features, but I leave that up to you. Obviously, if you're on Apple's every year upgrade program, or your carrier has a crazy deal, or you own it outright and you can trade it in with Apple and it costs you $300 or $350 to do this, then yeah. And by the way, if you want to shoot in ProRes, you're going to have to get the 256 gig model for those who want 4K ProRes. But anyway, it's for iPhone people, for starters, and it's, let's face it, it's still a gorgeous looking, high quality phone with a very consistent user experience, fantastic cameras, fast Face ID unlock, no Touch ID, oh well, masks, we know that story. But overall, I mean, it's hard to fault the phone. Nobody's going to be unhappy if they end up with one of these. Will this bring Android people over? Probably not, unless you were getting tired of Android or didn't like it for other reasons, right? Because we don't have any of those nifty, gee whiz new things other than really great cameras, which are a selling point. You know, you can't fold it, for example. It's not two screens like a Surface Duo 2. That sort of stuff just isn't where Apple's at right now, for better or worse. And I can say, thankfully, that's why we have choice. If a Galaxy Z Flip or Fold is your thing, if you like OnePlus and what they do with phones, all these different options are available to us. But I think Apple is continuing on in their Apple-y way, making a really high quality product. And that's basically what this is, with reasonable upgrades. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more cool tech videos and hit the notification bell so you know about them.